Hi guys, so today's video is going to be a little bit of a chatty discussion about a conversation that I see happening from time to time about the dumbing down of books. I'm specifically going to be referring to the dumbing down of young adult books. As somebody who reads a mix of adult and young adult fantasy, that's where I'm going to be talking because that's what I'm the most familiar with. Although you can definitely apply a lot of the topics that I'm going to be presenting to other genres or just books in general. I don't think there's anything wrong with you craving and wanting a certain style of writing more. If you are somebody who really enjoys books that you can just soak in every single word and sentence, if you're the kind of reader that really wants that, there's nothing wrong with it. I don't think there's anything wrong with wishing we had more books that were like that. I don't think there's anything wrong with liking what you like. I do a little bit get a little frustrated when people think what they want is what everybody should want, or is what would make society better if we just had books like what I like. I don't agree with that. I had said that I'm going to primarily focus on young adult and adult fantasy since that's what I have the most experience with. And I, generally speaking, of the two, find that people are more likely to trash on young adult. Also, you're allowed to poke fun and you're allowed to not like one over the other. But I see young adult considered to be not as good of quality, the writing's not as good, those sorts of things way more often from my own experiences than I do for adult fantasy, which I think is hilarious because one, a lot of times the people that are trashing on young adult don't really read young adult. And also because some of the books that are praised often in adult fantasy do not read with any more demand than young adult books. I'm going to list off 10 adult fantasy books that I think kind of fit into this. Of course, again, this is all opinion based. Maybe you think that the writing is spectacular in these books. I think there's a difference between writing and storytelling. I also don't think there's anything wrong with a more basic writing style, so I'm not even hating on these books for that. But these are adult fantasy books that I think are a little bit more simple to get through, and those would be Black Prism, Crescent City, The Final Empire, Stormfront, Rage of Dragons, The City of Brass, Kings of the Wild, Theft of Swords, Promise of Blood, and Foundryside. I just find it so funny because I do see people saying young adult that it's just a matter of trying to make money. It's just trying to make it as accessible as possible. There's no care about the sentences and the quality of the writing and the prose. It's just a lot of trash and we just spit it out to make money. And there's so many other negative consequences of this. And yet we praise these books. And again, there's nothing wrong with a more direct writing style. I love Mistborn. It's my favorite trilogy. I think it's amazing. Do I think it has the most demand of the reader? No, I don't. And I also like a really more simplistic writing style when I think other elements of the book do demand more of my attention. And in a lot of Sanderson's works, because Sanderson's kind of known for not having the most amazing, beautiful writing, his worlds are so intricate and his magic systems are so unique. And the time that he takes to build his characters, I'm just thinking about Kaladin and Storm My Archive, among many other of his characters. But I just think that if you're going to have this really complex world or all these other things that are going to be demanding of the reader, that it's not a terrible decision to have the writing style itself more digestible. It allows us to focus on these other things, and maybe that wasn't his intention, or maybe it was, but either way, for me, it works. Now, on the flip side, there's a book called The Queens of Innis Lear that is a retelling of King Lear, and I do think that the writing in that maybe is a little more abstract. I like both of these books. I think that the writing style being more simplistic in Storm My Archive and Mistborn served the book and the story. And then in Queens of Innis Lear, I think that the writing being a little more abstract and a little more atmospheric and perhaps prettier, I think it served that book well. So I don't think there's anything wrong with deciding that maybe if you are somebody who craves the more beautiful writing style, there's nothing wrong with feeling that the writing style in the Sanderson books is maybe a weakness in your opinion, but I don't believe that means it is factually a weakness. This is something Sanderson needs to work on or anything like that. And I'm using Sanderson as an example because he's a very big name author and that is something I see pretty often. If you don't like his writing style, No big deal. You don't have to. That's why books are great, because they're subjective. Tying this back into comparing the list of books I mentioned versus the young adult books, just in general young adult books. The books that I mentioned, these are really popular. These are books that are often praised. These are books that are often praised by people that trash on young adult books because they feel young adult books don't have good enough writing. And I'm like, it feels hypocritical a little bit, because I'm like, but these are not, they're not doing anything different in their approach to the writing itself. I also just don't think there's anything wrong with a more simplistic writing style. That's why it's called a style. But I still think that if you don't like that element of these books, that's one thing. But to act like the entirety of young adult is somehow lesser, even though a lot of the books that are praised and enjoyed in adult fantasy are basically the same when it comes to the demand of the reader. I don't understand how we can trash these over here and then be like, but Dresden Files, isn't it amazing? Something else that kind of plays into all of this is this unintentional elitism that comes with deciding that if something is more accessible to the masses, then somehow it is lesser. And I went to school for violin. I was around a lot of music snobs when I was in college, and you know what? I love the Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto, and I'll listen to a pop song. I think they both have different things about them that are fun. Do I like the Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto? Do I appreciate it more? Yeah. Do I think it's better, or that everybody who listens to pop music is kidding themselves if they think it's good? No, I don't. Because that's kind of basically saying that you have to like the things that I like, and you have to appreciate the things I appreciate. Otherwise, you're not cultured. I think there's this idea that sometimes when things become mainstream, they must not be as good anymore, because mainstream means it's enjoyed by a lot of people, the majority of people, the average citizen, and a lot of people don't want to view themselves as average. They don't want to like the things that average people are liking, or they don't want people to think that they like the things that average people are liking. The average in America, the average person reads at, I believe, middle school level. And some people will see that and be like, oh, it's because people are dumb, they don't challenge themselves, they don't want to improve themselves, those sorts of things. And I'm like, let's dial back for a second and let's talk about some privileges. I am not saying that I had the absolute perfect squeaky clean childhood, because I didn't. However, I grew up in a nice area. I went to a nice school. Those are privileges, and those privileges allowed me to participate in reading. However, there are people who, one, they're afraid to even go to school because they have to walk to school, and the neighborhood they're living in isn't a very good one. So they're in fear all the time. There's also studies that show that when your adrenaline is up that high all the time, it has actual consequences to your health. So there's that factor. And if they do get to school, if they have a difficult home life, then it's probably less likely that they're going to be able to focus entirely on what they're being taught at school. They're probably not going to go at home and read a bunch and expand their vocabulary and really build their reading comprehension. Also, there might be people who live in areas where accessibility for nutritious food is not as high. You also might not even go to a school that has really good funding and up-to-date textbooks. You might live in an area that doesn't have particularly good transportation. Maybe you can't afford a vehicle. Maybe your family can't afford a vehicle. And so you can't really get yourself over to the library to check out some books. You don't have these options. And so if you don't have these options, yeah, you might build yourself and your intelligence might be focused in on a different area. There's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't make a person stupid. It just means they don't maybe read at the same level as somebody who didn't have all these other factors. And maybe some people will have every single privilege that is against what I was just talking about, and they still don't have as high of a reading comprehension level. That's okay. Some people have learning disabilities that are associated with reading. Some people, their brains are just wired different, and their intelligence comes in completely different areas. So, what I'm getting at with all of this is to try and act like we have to raise the standard for things that are generally to be enjoyed as a hobby kind of rings of privilege a little bit. I don't think that because your hobby might not be challenging you, that you need to feel bad about yourself. And because somebody's hobby isn't challenging other people, I don't think those people should feel like they have to be challenged in that area. Everybody's going to try and grow as a person in their own ways. And some people, I always use the example of if somebody is a nurse and they just got off a really long shift, they literally watched people die, and they want to come home and they want to read their fluffy YA book because that's what allows them to enjoy their free time, give them some fuel so they can go back out there and try to save some lives. Why on earth do we think that that person is kidding themselves if they think that that's decent? Did they have a good time with it? Did they have fun? I also just think that if you're somebody who has tons of time to read and you also have a slightly cushier job than maybe this nurse example that I gave, and yet you're over here on your high horse about how this person needs to challenge themselves and they're kidding themselves, they think that book's any good, how could they possibly read that trash? I'm just like, really though? And you know what? Maybe you have an easy job and maybe you like the trashy books. Who cares? Who cares? Why do we care? Why? Because if you're so concerned about somebody's education, I'm just kind of like, when was the last time you donated to funding for schools? Do you really care, or do you just care about being judgmental and making yourself feel a little bit better? If we are readers and we would love for more people to partake in this particular hobby, I think less judgment is part of how we encourage people to be a part of it. Anyway, I had every intention of getting through this video and not getting worked up, and I still got worked up because I just don't understand how some people think that saying something really judgmental about what somebody likes in their spare time is somehow helpful to anyone. I just don't get it. I don't understand when people think that what they like is what everybody should like. And I also don't understand the inability to recognize that not everybody has had the same privileges in life and not everybody has the same opportunities. I don't understand. Especially as readers who pride ourselves on being able to put ourselves in other people's shoes through the stories that we read, and not being able to do that when it comes to our own lives is just very ironic to me. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you all later. Bye.